Okay, it's preparing right now. Okay, it's on. Okay, it's prepared. Okay, it's prepared. All right, I think we're good. So we are now recording and streaming live on YouTube.
All right. We ready to start?
I'm good to go.
All right. I will call the meeting to order at 5:04 p.m. Is there any public comment?
I don't have anybody on here. And then I just closed off because of the audio. I just closed off on YouTube. So I can't see it right now. Otherwise I get this reverberation and I am not sure how to do that. So I don't believe we have any comments on there, but people can call in if they want to make public comment for the second one.
Okay.
Do you want me? Well, it's right on the agenda cover packet cover.
As far as calling in?
Yep.
Yeah. So if people want, they can call in at the number provided.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, Dean, let's take a couple of minutes to review the norms. Let me know when you're ready. Actually, do you want me to just read them? It's been a while.
Sure, if you have them right in front of you.
Sure. So as a board, 1, we will assume good intentions without judgment. 2, we will engage in open, respectful discussion where everyone has a voice and all ideas are considered. 3, we will keep a purpose, serving Winhall and focusing on education and taxpayer needs. And our vision statement is to support each child's intellectual growth and academic success while encouraging creativity, independence, and responsibility to self and others. Okay, so moving on, recommendation to approve the minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I will second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, it is a pass. And I'm sorry, did I did I ask if there was any discussion or amendments?
You didn't, but I don't have any unless you do.
The only comment that I was going to make is that Emily, who's listed under, item 1 on the minutes, is Emily Schriebel. And I don't know if we want to add in her last name.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
So with that amendment, I move that we recommend to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Can you just tell me how to spell that so that we have it accurate?
Yes, and I'm going to double check this.
We can,
SCHREIBL.
okay,
Thank you.
sure.
Okay, moving on to the report of the superintendent of schools. Randy?
So you can see in the packet what I as we were trying to prepare for this, I felt like it was very difficult to try to pull out the enrollment from the discussion on the impact of the enrollment on the tax rate. So rather than try to do that, I included them both in one agenda item so that we could discuss both of them at the same time. Let me admit Meredith. So you can see on packet page 5. Hi, Meredith.
Really sorry. The original meeting ID that was sent was not I think you sent an updated link.
I didn't get one.
I don't know. Well, you're here.
Well, you're here now. That's all that matters.
Yes, I'm sorry. I put it in my calendar with the original link and then you changed the link.
So if we look at the current enrollment, and this is when we printed this, we're 29 students over budget. Again, there's some minor changes from previous versions of this. We're still, our public in-state numbers are down and our private in-state numbers are up. So we're 29 students over budget. If you look, before we probably engage in conversation, Sue, I think it would be helpful for you to talk about, we included in here this review of the penalty calculation. And that was just to make sure that we were really clear with you as board members, as well as with the public, about how these numbers are derived and some of the kind of facts surrounding it. Oh, she left. Sorry, I missed the Meredith. She's back. And then we can also go over the tax rate. So I guess I would just ask for the ease of discussing this, whether or not we want to just do it all at one time, or whether you want to spend time talking about the enrollment prior to talking about the tax rate. What would be easiest for you?
I'm fine. I mean, the nice thing is the enrollment numbers seems to have been pretty consistent the last few spreadsheets that you all have prepared, which is nice. So, I mean, we seem to be hovering right around that 29 additional beyond our budget mark. So I'm glad that seems to be, not increasing further, which is good. So I'm fine if we kind of combine both of them together, if that's okay with Dean and Meredith.
We can just talk.
Fine.
Do you want, does it make sense for Sue to go over the tax rate modeling sheet to talk through that with you, and then open it up for discussion?
Sure. Is that
Okay.
good with you guys?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna say this probably for the 100th time, but these are not what your tax rates are gonna look like. This is modeling just meant to share with you sort of what the variance in the tax rate might look like if we, depending upon what scenario we work with and how you guys choose to move forward. So what I did prepare, the budget based on what information we have now. We don't have enough information really to finalize those numbers, but I did put together what a budget, might look like today for next year. And so that's what I'm building this model off of. So there's lots of pieces that I'm using, either that type of an estimate, I'm creating something based on the information that we have, or I'm using numbers that exist from last year. For example, the penalty threshold. We don't know what that number is yet. We'll know it in another month. And so right now that number that's in there that you're seeing, that 18,756, is the same number that we saw last year. The property yield will get a recommendation from the tax commissioner on the property yield on December 1st, but we won't actually know what the property yield is going to be until the legislature votes on it, which is usually in the spring. So that's not for some time. So that's last year's number as well. And of course, the CLA, that doesn't get finalized until December. So we're also using last year's number there in the modeling. So what I've got is a bunch of different scenarios. We have different things that we're playing with. One, we're going to have to decide whether or not we want to borrow. And borrowing would mean going to the voters and asking them to approve us borrowing for a 3-year long-term note, basically. And we put that on the warning. My recommendation is going to be to put that on the warning for the loan to begin in July of 2021. And what that will mean is we won't make the first payment on that loan until FY23. So we won't have to include that first payment of the note in next year's budget, which sort of alleviates a little bit of pressure on this tax rate, right? So that's what I'm going with in this scenario. Go ahead, Meredith.
Can I just ask a quick, are you talking about an interest payment, or are you talking about a principal payment?
The principal payment. Interest we would have to pay well, the interest is going to be on the principal payment. So yeah, it's something that we're going to have to pay when we make the first payment.
So, but is the interest monthly, or is it rolled in? Is it accrued? Is it PIK?
Well, we don't have a note yet, so I can't answer that question.
No, but how are we intending on structuring it?
On an annual basis.
Okay, so it's an annual pay interest with, and so it's not, the note is not due at the end of 3 years. So, which is kind of a standard. The reason why I'm asking is because typically you'll pay interest, and then there could be kind of a portion of the principal payment over, monthly. So I'm interested in how the note is structured and what our options are in structuring the note from a financial perspective, because if we can delay any of the principal payment and it's interest only in the beginning, it would be easier and more palatable as we work through the issues.
That was exactly what I was just saying. That is what I would anticipate, that we would not want to make the first principal payment until FY23. I think that it's a little early to be talking about the structure of the note. We would get into that later on in the year. Right now, I'm just presenting to you the fact that I did not include, when it says note, I did not include the fact that we would make a first principal payment until in 22. I'm saying we'll make it in 23 because that's what I would anticipate we would all want to do. It would be the best case scenario. You wouldn't want to have to include that principal payment in FY22. That's just going to bump up the tax rate. If we have the ability to postpone it a year, I would recommend that makes the most sense. So we don't have to make that decision. I'm just sharing that that's what I used when I built the model. Okay, that was how I went forward with the note, making that assumption for now. The next piece is the CRF. And Randy, have you shared with the board yet the results from AOE? So we heard from Brad James up at Agency of Education that he did reach out to the feds, and they agreed that we could tuition for new residents because of COVID-19 could be included in the CRF application. So it's
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I had heard that was just for former second home owners that have now moved to Winhall. Is it for all people who have moved here because of the pandemic, or do we?
So Brad asked the question with why his question included anything about second homeowners, I don't know. I think it was probably just a misunderstanding on his part as to, who actually moves to Winhall and why. And regardless, what we got back in writing from the feds, from Guidehouse, had nothing to do with second homeowners. So I'm sort of just throwing that out of the equation.
Either.
Second homeowners doesn't matter. Is your residency in Winhall now? Did you change your residency due to COVID-19? That's what it comes down to.
Okay.
So, in this modeling, where you see CRF and no CRF, I have an estimate of what we might be able to claim through CRF, which is about $178,000. That's not a real number. That's just an estimate. We can only claim tuition through December 31st. We cannot claim tuition for the whole school year because the Coronavirus Relief Act funds are only for March something through December 31st. Okay, so we can't claim the whole year of tuition, only it's prorated basically. The other thing that we can't do because of how the state has structured the CRF funds is we can't claim every single student that moved to Winhall because of COVID-19. We can only claim the number of the FTE basically that we exceed our budget. So the way the state is viewing CRF funds is they will, they consider it sort of budgeted and repurposed funds. And so if we had money in our budget to cover it, they wouldn't give us CRF funds for that. So there's just this portion that we get to calculate, and we have to collect documentation from families to support the fact that they actually moved here because of COVID-19. And we'll be working we'll be sending out attestations for families to sign off for us.
So just to make sure I understand, we are looking at, basically the 29 kids who are in excess of our budget. If they moved here as a result of the pandemic and only able to request CRF monies to cover their educational costs through December 31st?
Correct.
Okay.
So that's the CRF piece. And then of course we have our tax stabilization reserve to work with as well. So the different models here are just sort of throwing the note in, keeping the note out, CRF in, CRF out, using reserves, not using reserves, and what that might look like to a tax rate. What does it do to the penalty calculation? What does it do to how much we can exclude from the penalty calculation? And it's still not set in stone that we're going to have a penalty because we don't have numbers yet from the state, right? So we can't really calculate a tax rate. It's likely. It's a likely scenario that we're going to hit penalty this year. So we're looking at worst case scenario. If we decided that we wanted to include the entire deficit, we would be looking at about a 60-cent increase on the tax rate. Best case scenario.
60.
Yes.
It's on page 7 of the agenda packet.
Thank you.
Best case scenario, we go out, we borrow. We don't make our first payment until fiscal year 23. And we get CRF money and we use our full tax stabilization reserve and we have a 20-cent increase on the tax rate. So the point here is looking at, that's a 40-cent difference. So whether the tax rate turns out to be a little lower right from the get-go because how the state numbers shift and what our budget really looks like, or even a little higher, best case, worst case scenario, that's the number that we're playing with. And there's different variations in between.
So, and can I just add, I think I'm correct. I mean, that increase is only looking at the increase based on the numbers that moved in FY21 after we passed our budget. It does not include an increase that we would then need to roll these students into our FY22 budget and again, allow for ghost students, you know, at whatever number we feel is appropriate. So even the 20-cent increase is, I mean, I understand it's not a real number, but even that number is going to be higher because we're going to be passing a budget.
I've included all of that in the budget number. So I created a budget that was typical of what I would normally do for you. It just doesn't have enough information yet. So for example, it has all of the kids. It has some estimated tuition rates. It has your 15 ghost students. It doesn't have things like the additional student service costs because I don't know what those are yet. It doesn't have BRSU assessments because we don't have those yet. So there's a lot of pieces that are missing. It's the best that I can do with predicting a budget today. It's not what your budget will look like, but it does include all of those extra students.
Okay.
And
then
I'm
sorry.
Just to continue with that, equalized pupil is the same thing. We don't have an equalized pupil yet, but I have done an estimate based on the counts that I know we're going to submit.
Okay.
So it's close as we can get right now.
Okay. And then at the, like your final line of budget reduction or revenue increase to stay out of penalty. So if you're looking at column F, that additional $246,884 that money includes us taking out a note? Or if we were able to raise $246,884, would we not then need to get a note?
No, you would still need to get a note. That includes getting a note. So the note is assumed, and we're not raising any deficit in column F. In column F, we're saying we don't have to raise the deficit because we're going to borrow. So there's no deficit included in that number. But in order to stay out of penalty, we still would need another $246,000. And that's why I say it's likely we're going to find ourselves in a penalty situation this year. Even if it's not as drastic as that, it is still likely we're going to see that.
Can I ask you a question? Given the increase in tax revenue from the real estate sales, is that at all factored in?
It doesn't have anything to do with the tax rate calculation.
It has to do with the cost per actualized pupil, I thought.
No,
it doesn't. Where does real estate assessment? And so my understanding is real estate revenue from taxes, tax revenue. So the increase in tax revenue would cover some of the, how is it not in play that the increase in tax revenue doesn't cover the increase in the number of students?
Because we don't get our taxes from the revenue that Winhall raises on properties. We get our taxes from the education fund. So there's a formula, which is what we're looking at, which sets what the rate that everybody's going to pay will be. And that is what everybody pays. All of that money, all of that extra money that you're talking about that may exist because of people, well, I don't know if there's any extra money because the houses were always there and maybe they're just sold from one person to another. But regardless, if there was an increase in tax revenues, that just goes to the education fund. It's not, it doesn't go to Winhall so that we can draw from it in order to reduce our taxes. It's a formula, all the money goes to the ed fund.
So what I'm kind of confused about is given the increase in value, because my understanding is that the property values have increased in Winhall and that, you know, given the increase in property value, people will be paying more taxes. But you're saying that despite the fact that people are paying more taxes because of the increase in value, because of the shortage of supply, none of that revenue will trickle down into our education of our children?
The only impact that it's going to have on the tax rate formula is in the common level of appraisal. So whether those homes are undervalued or overvalued, it will hit that number, which does affect your tax rate.
Could you go into a little bit more detail on that? Because my understanding is we're very close to triggering based on that appraised value, because everything is trading so much above original list that if it increases the appraised value, how would that potentially positively impact our tax rate to bring it down a little?
So I'm not sure if I understand the question fully. Right now, your common level of appraisal is approximately 97%.
Correct.
So what that does is increases the tax rate a little bit, saying those homes are a little bit undervalued. That's what's happening now with the common
so
level.
Let's say the homes, then all of a sudden a home that was $600,000 or $400,000 is now trading for $600,000 or $750,000. So given the increase in and then it sells. So the home that when it sells, is it then taxed at the higher rate? And so if it's taxed at the higher rate, how does that impact our tax rate?
It doesn't.
We would have to have a reassessment, like a townwide reassessment, which.
But isn't there a reassessment trigger based on real estate value?
So property valuation and review, I think, is the agency that puts out the common level of appraisal. And I want to say, don't hold me to this because this isn't my area, Meredith, that I believe they look at 3 years worth of sales and property values to determine whether or not your common level appraisal needs to be bumped up or go down. I believe it's a 3-year time period that they look at. There's also, as you said, Jen, you can do a reassessment to get everybody back on the right page. And I think usually towns will have to kick into gear to do that. If they don't already have a schedule to be doing that, then, when you start to see that common level appraisal go down pretty far, then it's hiking your tax rate up, and you don't want to do that. You want that common level appraisal to be close to 100. That's ideal. And right now yours has been hovering beneath it. I think it's been around between the 95 and 100 mark for some time. I don't think it's really very, very drastically.
Right, but we've had unprecedented real estate sales, which is
but Meredith, even if tax rates went up because property values went up, then yeah, sure. Like even if it worked the way you want it to work, people would still be paying more taxes, which doesn't solve their problem.
No, but I'm saying that people are paying more taxes now, because if you're buying a home that was originally listed last year for $500,000 and you close on it and the list price is $1 million, now
you're paying
the
taxes
tax rate
based on
going to be based on the list price as opposed to the sale. Isn't it based on the sale price as opposed to?
It's based on the appraisal of the house.
On the appraisal,
not the sale of the house.
But most of the appraisal is done by the bank. So I'm curious how the appraisals have come in and how that might impact the tax rate to our benefit. So basically all these people are moving into the area, they're buying homes, and they're paying a lot more for the homes than original list because there's been bidding wars and X, Y, and Z. And so my question is, who is capturing that tax base if it's not the town?
So the town taxes are not the same thing as the ed fund.
But some of that money has to go into the education fund.
Yeah, but the amount of money we get to take out of the ed fund has nothing to do with how much we put in.
So Meredith, there's a property transfer tax that is based on the sale price of the house, and that money goes to Montpelier and it goes into the Gen Ed fund.
The gen ed fund.
To
And
the
then-
gen fund, sorry.
So assuming that we've had unprecedented real estate sales, we're only still getting a small trickle amount out based on the influx of people into the area and buying homes in the area.
It's based on your budget. The money that you get from the education fund is based on your budget and what you need. It has nothing to do with what your property tax base is, how much taxes are raised in the town. All the taxes that are raised in the town, regardless of whether your homes are undervalued or overvalued or or you have bidding wars, it doesn't matter. All of those taxes are going to the ed fund.
The general
You get back
education fund
only what's in the
Montpelier.
budget.
So everything's going into a general education fund in Montpelier. But now we're in a situation where we've had all these people move into the town, they've bought homes, right? So we're sending all this money to Montpelier, but we're still getting a trickle out.
The money we get is based on our cost per equalized pupil, and the formula to calculate cost per equalized pupil does not take into account how much the house sold for. It's not relevant.
Correct.
It never has been. It never has been.
So no matter how many people move into the area or how much we pay in taxes, that goes to a general education fund. And then then despite the fact that we pay all these taxes, it goes into a general education fund that we do not then recognize the value of our, so basically I'm paying taxes. Let's say I buy a house for $1 million and I'm paying taxes. It just goes into a general education fund.
Yeah, it's basically we're sending money up based on the PTRs, the property transfer tax returns. That money goes to Montpelier. What we're talking about is how all of the money that goes up there is redistributed to the town based on the formula that Sue's providing the overview for.
But it seems kind of counterintuitive to me that we had all these people move into our town and are paying taxes to send their, the way it works in other areas is you move into the town, you pay taxes, the taxes cover the education costs. Here, what you're saying is you move into the town, you pay taxes, it goes into a general education fund, and it's redistributed based on cost per actualized people that has nothing to do with the number of people that move into our town.
And it's been like that for over 20 years.
Right.
So that's Act 60. When
Right.
Act 60 was passed, we moved to a state education system, which took away exactly what you're describing. It used to be that way many, many years ago.
And Meredith, just so you know, this is an angle that I looked into probably in July, something like that, where I actually went through and calculated the amount of money that we've sent up since the pandemic, through the date that I was in the town clerk's office. But those funds don't cross. There's no connection between the two of them. It would require a change to the funding formula, which is not going to happen, certainly not now that the legislature has been adjourned for the rest of the year. So it's a nice idea. I had the same idea. It's not going to go anywhere right now.
Yeah.
I can assure you that previous boards have had the same thought.
Yeah.
So do you have any more questions for Sue about the modeling that she's done and the different iterations that we provided you?
No,
Well,
but
I had
thank you
two
for
questions.
doing it.
Yeah. Because this is really helpful to kind of see the spectrum here. With regard to the note, I mean, I'm still personally, I would love to find a way to not have to take out a note. If we had to take out a note, like if truly, that was our last option, we could get that funding fairly quickly, correct? And I mean, there's still the slimmest of possibilities that we might be able to get a note at no interest rate, not through the banks, but, through, if there was something within the legislature where they would be willing to give us an interest-free loan.
So it's not something that we can just do quickly. We have to have the voters approve it. So we'll have to get language from our attorney we haven't had to do this ever before. So we'll get language to include in a warning so the voters can vote on it. So it does have to be planned and it has to be approved by the voters. So we would want to enter into an approved budget that we pass along to the voters that also includes, that on the warning. So whatever tax rate we show them as an estimate, and whatever budget we prepare, we're going to have to make a decision one way or the other if we want to include a borrowing in the warning. So it's not quick with respect to that. And we would bid at the banks for it, and I would not imagine it would be interest free. Now, what you're talking about, if the legislature did offer something like that, again, they haven't done that before. If they decided to, that would be awesome. And I don't think that our voting on it would get in the way of that. We would still have to vote on it. It would just be, we would be getting the funding from a different source.
Right. Okay. So we could do that. We could provisionally vote on it. And then if the voters approve it, then we would be authorized to start looking around and,
Right.
try to request an interest-free loan. And short of that, we would get one through the banks, as you've been getting the quotes for.
Exactly.
Okay.
Can we actually, is 3 years the standard tenor, or can we go out 5 years?
I believe that 3 years is
the last meeting as well, because if you spread it out over time, is there any reason why we're choosing 3 years versus 5?
I believe that's what's in statute. And I'll confirm that for you, Meredith.
And Sue, one other question. If, going forward over those 3 years, if we have a population decline, such that we would have, a surplus in our budget because, fewer students showed up than we had passed a budget for, would we be able to prepay the note to sort of help bring that down?
It all depends on the terms of the note.
Okay.
So it's going to depend on how the bank is willing to offer us a note. I always, whenever I'm bidding, request no prepayment penalty, and that if there is a penalty for prepayment, that they state what it is. So basically what that means is if they're not willing to accept the money early, you can still pay them early, but you have to give them all the interest that you would have given them anyway. So then why bother? Right.
Right.
But that's it. And I've seen it both ways. It's a financial thing. So, that's a banking decision at what the market looks like at the time that they're making the loan. So.
Okay. Oh, and I did have another question, because I'd sent you an email earlier and I wasn't really expecting an answer, but I had asked Sue if she could, run another calculation of no note, CRF monies, and dipping into the reserve. But it looks, would it be accurate to take column C, which is no note, CRF monies, and no reserve, and then just subtract off?
Well, you also adjust. There's another adjustment I think that I can do in there that is it's not the additional over the penalty also gets adjusted. So yeah, I did it. It's about 34 cents for a variance.
Okay.
It comes to $2.11. So and I can update the spreadsheet. I think it will be more useful when we're able to look at numbers that are more real. Right now I think it's just that sort of distinction between 60 cents, 40 cents, 50 cents, 30 cents, what depending upon what's in. We don't even know how much CRF we're going to be able to draw yet. Again, that's just an estimate on my part.
Okay. Thank you so much for putting this together.
Sure.
Okay. Any more questions about it? So we'll have more information in November, certainly more accurate information in December. And we'll just continue on for right now and see if anything happens. I don't know, Jen, if you want to talk at all about conversations with independent schools at all, or we want to just let that lie for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in a nutshell, Brandy, Sue, and I met with several heads of independent schools and a couple of their board chairs, and just really reviewed the situation in which we find ourselves, with an idea that, to the extent that they are willing and able, bless you, that they would perhaps, so as we all know, there are very, very few levers that we as a school board have to pull. And, if you look at, where we are, there are different ways to sort of reduce the budget shortfall that we're facing. And so, one approach is that the independent schools have the ability, because they are independent, to choose to not submit tuition requests for all of the students from Winhall that are currently attending their school. Whether they do that is up to them. I think, we gave a pretty comprehensive overview. And, my understanding is that, there are many steps involved. These heads of school need to speak with their own boards and, really think about what they are willing and able to do. Another thing is families can choose not to submit the paperwork and, absorb the cost that would otherwise be paid for by the BRSU. But that's really, that's where we are. Those are sort of the final two levers. And I don't have any firm information with regard to the independent schools other than to say, I think they've heard the message, they're aware of the situation, and they're, working on things from their own ends.
I wouldn't bank on getting anything of value on that front.
I remain hopeful.
I mean, yeah, I don't think all the schools have the leverage to even, I don't think they have the ability to do it, even if they wanted to. Some of them, maybe some of them can, but I doubt.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at it as, every dollar that we're over penalty is another dollar that's added to the tax rate. I mean, even anything would be helpful. So
they do have the ability to set a date of acceptance to give clearer guidance to the numbers so we can better anticipate our budget. So as I recall, the last time we were in this situation, certain schools were able to limit or give us further guidance and commit to that number, which we've seemed to have blown through this year. I don't know how long that guidance was for, but as I recall, the independent schools were willing to work with us to give us a number, and then they kind of stuck to that number from Winhall. I don't know what happened this year, why that didn't go. Was that discussed in any of the meetings?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest answer is the pandemic. I mean, there are people coming in and.
Yeah, but pigs get fed and hogs get slaughtered. Like, I understand that you want to take all the people, but MEMS there was a huge article that the BRSU has several schools that are actually down enrollment from the independent schools. So there was, granted, I understand that.
So you're just expecting them to leave all that money on the table?
But what I'm simply saying is that, it maybe they wouldn't have all moved here if they couldn't have gone to the exact school that they wanted to go to because, everybody let them in.
Yeah, I mean, we can't know. And I will say, I have strongly suggested in that meeting that going forward, if I were an independent school, I would really, in an effort to work with the BRSU, the town of Winhall, the school board, the voters, that any student who is known to an independent school by December 1st that can be put into our budget, we can account for. But any student who comes in after December 1st, it's just creating this yo-yo effect. And I realize, as a practical matter for people who are running schools, they're not going to know by December 1st, the universe of students who are going to be attending the school the following September. On the other hand, if I were a school and I said, okay, well, if I have to absorb the cost of educating a student because they didn't make the December 1st cutoff, well, then they're rolled into future budgets. And now we have a more stable model that we can all sort of work around. And I think in the interest of, true stabilization and continuity, that to me is a compelling argument. Whether they choose to go with that, they're independent, they can do what they want. But I think if it, committing to a December 1st deadline would really show an awful lot of, partnering with the school board to come up with something that we can budget.
It doesn't even have to be committing to that. I mean, just committing to that number. So you don't, it's fine. Take your kids, say, and then if it's capping, it goes back to that. So we don't want to say that, but it does go back to that. It is very helpful. And then at the end of the day, you know, there are schools that have availability. So it entices people to move here a little bit sooner and make their decisions a little bit earlier.
Yep.
Yeah, I
So-
don't know. I don't think that they're going to leave money on the table when that's how they survive. They survive off of the tuition dollars from enrollment. They are more successful when they can educate more students with the same number of faculty. So they're going to want big class sizes. They're going to want as many students as they can get, and asking them to say, oh, well, sorry, we can only take 50 and you're number 51, so we're not going to pay for it. I don't, yeah, maybe.
But they've done it
I
in
don't
the
see it
past,
happening.
Dean. But Dean, they've
Yeah,
done
but
it.
it lasted all of 6 months, and now we're back. Like, they didn't do it this year. What happened to that 50 cap?
I don't know. That's what I was asking. I don't know.
I know what happened to it. There was money on the table. That's
No,
what happened to it.
I get it that there was money on the table, but somehow, you know, I didn't know what the original agreement was. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm asking. I understand there's money on the table. Everybody wants money, but I also understand that there was an agreement that was discussed and made, and I'm curious what happened to that agreement.
But this is why the school board and the independent schools are independent of each other. We don't have any control over their internal process, and they don't have any control over ours.
Yeah, but I that still doesn't answer my question. What happened with the cap?
I think the pandemic happened. And so, I mean, I think that's probably the best way. Of course, families are moving here. They're looking for a school. You're a school. You're going to say like, hey, come look at my school. But, my point is that as an independent school, if you know that this fluctuation reduces the stability of our K-12 choice model, I think it would be in their interest to, absorb the cost of any students beyond the December 1st deadline in that first year, knowing that those students can be rolled in for years 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. That's a more stable model. And I think that I understand that schools are in business to educate children and make money, but they also, I think, enjoy having the benefit of being the recipient of a K-12 choice model that helps them pay, helps them receive money that they can otherwise receive.
I agree. I'm just saying it's a big ask. It's a big ask to ask.
Well, here we are
to do that.
Yes, but Dean, the alternative is also, I think it's not good either. So it's a big ask, but it can't continue the way it's continuing.
Yeah.
You can't have a 60-cent tax hike, because if you have a $500,000 or $400,000 home, you can estimate how much of an increase that's going to be.
Yeah, but let's step back to the 30,000 foot view for a second. Let's forget about the budget for a second. Forget about the tax rate. Just think about it in this most simple terms. We want people to want to live here. We want people to want to move here. We don't want to discourage people from bringing their families to live in Winhall. That's what we want to happen. And so, it's frustrating, and I completely understand that we're in a situation where nothing makes sense, and we're everything is the opposite of the way that it should be. But I don't think we can put the burden of saving our system of school choice on the schools. And to be honest with you, I don't know that I agree that it's the Winhall School Board's sole purpose to preserve choice. It's the Winhall School Board's purpose to provide education for the children of Winhall in whatever way the town of Winhall and the voters of Winhall see fit. And I agree with you that I absolutely agree with you that this is definitely putting stress on the choice model for sure, and that the independent schools definitely get a benefit from that.
Yeah.
Well, and actually that was why I reread our norms, Dean, because norm 3 is we will keep a purpose serving Winhall and focusing on education and taxpayer needs. It's a balance. I personally love the K-12 choice model. I love it. I think that it has an awful lot of benefits. But as the chair of the school board, when I look at a 60-cent potential tax increase, I mean, I have to wonder what my duty is as a fiduciary. I mean, I can't imagine standing up in March and saying to the town residents, like, hey, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Many of you have lost your jobs, and here's a 60-cent tax increase. I mean, that just.
No, but I agree. But let's remember that we had this debate.
And the tax.
We had the debate, and the voters decided that they wanted to keep the choice model.
Correct.
So, and that's what we're. Yeah. No, I'm just saying. I think that we need to remember that we went to the voters and we said, there's a cost to choice. And if you want to preserve choice, this is what the future could look like. We talked about this scenario ad nauseum, and now it's here. So we have to deal with it. But I don't think it's fair to try to pass the buck on to the independent schools and say, well, you guys just have to, not pay for these, not take tuition for these kids or eat it,
I don't see it as being a fair, not fair thing. I think the elimination of choice would directly impact the independent schools very severely. And therefore, I think to educate them on what the potential loss of choice might mean, they may come forth and say, hey, we've come up with these alternative solutions that may, help stabilize the budget and, stabilize the tax rate and so on and so forth. I understand we've been here before, but as Jen mentioned, it is COVID. It is, an extraordinary situation. And so I do think it warrants us definitely revisiting all sorts of alternatives and going back and looking at the issue again, because this is really unprecedented times. And I think that the potential tax hike is extraordinarily large. And we really do owe it to ourselves to just make sure we explore all the alternatives, is all I'm saying.
Okay.
And I guess I would just follow up with that by saying that Jennifer certainly had many conversations. We've had meetings with a number of heads of schools. I think that the communication around the symbiotic relationship between the Winhall School District and the town of Winhall and the schools, in many cases, is a pretty important and symbiotic relationship. And so I think that they're hearing that. And to Dean's point, they're also looking at their own situations. And it's unclear whether they're going to respond to the requests and that have been made or not. I think we'll have a better sense over the next month or two.
Have you spoken to all the schools or just the K-8?
I think every one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, other than, we have one kid who's at Burke. Burke was not at the meeting, but.
We have met with all the local schools.
Okay, good.
So, okay, are we ready to move on? Are we comfortable moving on?
I am.
So we just included, and this is not something we typically do because your budget's so simple, but I had asked Sue, I'm really trying to just develop some consistency between all the boards for, and in the month of October, presenting our FY20 year end. Next month, we'll look at where we are with FY20 when anticipated, which you've already seen a number of times, and then in December present FY22. So I don't know that there's anything really to discuss, but I just wanted to share with you where yours is much simpler than everybody else's. So I just am sharing FY20 with you and see if you have any questions. We're good? Nothing to.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So our next agenda item is a residency review, which we're requesting executive session to go into if we want to discuss residency, which I'm anticipating you would like to do. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to, I don't know if you want to jump down and do item 6 and 7 in the agenda first, or you want, and then.
I think that makes sense.
And then we can come back and then we can move into executive session.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, board updates. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add. Okay. Agenda items for next meeting.
Like
We'll finish the residency review. Continue enrollment issues.
Mhm.
Anything
We
else?
can do an update, so if we have any more information
Yep.
on our end.
Okay. Anything else before we move on to public comment? Okay, public comment?
Yeah, I don't have anybody in here.
Is still there?
Is who? Andrew?
Yes.
Andrew's still here. Andrew, do you have a question for us?
Hang on. Nope. No questions.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Reflection on norms. I think, we are all doing our best to keep the norms in mind and our vision statement and, to try to find the best path forward with the deck that we've been dealt.
I think that we did fine on norms. I think that this is, if there was ever a time for us to get animated and be invested in this emotionally, now's the time. You're never gonna, this is, as Meredith mentioned a couple times, this is unprecedented. Like, this is the moment where we find out how much stress the system can take, because it's never gonna get stressed more than it is right now. At least not that I've seen.
Yeah. I
Good
agree.
news is we've been here kind of before, so we're,
Yeah, and we already got a lot of important answers to question, like we got answers to important questions. So we know what the expectation from the voters is, we know what the expectation from the community is, and we can move forward with a clear vision of what we want to do.
All right. So the next meeting date, November 17th at 5. All right, and then I have nothing further before we move into executive session.
Okay, hold on one second. I'm just pulling up YouTube. I just want to see if there are any questions in the chat. I don't see any. But I'm not. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything here. Okay. No questions in there either for us. Okay. All right. So we ready to go into executive session?
Yeah. Do we need a motion?
Yes.
All right. I will move that we move into executive session to conduct a residency review.
Second.
Hi, everybody.
Bye,
Bye,
Sue.
Sue.
Bye, Sue. Thank you.
We're
No
going
problem. Take care.
5:56.
Okay.
Okay, so hold on, stop, because I need to pause recording and I need to take us off YouTube.